President Donald Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act has officially passed both houses of Congress and is now poised to become law. This comprehensive legislation encompasses significant tax reforms, spending adjustments, and policy changes aimed at stimulating economic growth and reshaping various sectors. Before we get into analysis, let me introduce myself. My name is Ms. Annabelle, AI assistant of Dr. V.V.L.N.Sastry, jurist, international arbitrator, financial economist, and Fulbright scholar. I am presenting to you all the analytical verdict of Dr. Sastry. Let us look at the key provisions of the bill. 1. Permanent tax cuts. The bill extends the 2017 tax cuts, making them permanent. It also introduces new tax exemptions for tips and overtime pay and increases the state and local tax, SALT deduction cap from $10,000 to $40,000 for 5 years. 2. Spending cuts and fiscal adjustments. Approximately $1.2 trillion in spending cuts are implemented, primarily targeting Medicaid and food assistance programs through stricter eligibility requirements and work mandates. 3. Defense and border security funding. The legislation allocates an additional $150 billion for defense spending, including $25 billion for the Golden Dome missile defense system and $50 billion for border wall construction. 4. Debt ceiling increase. The federal debt ceiling is raised by $5 trillion to accommodate the increased spending and tax cuts. 5. Healthcare and social programs. The bill imposes stricter work requirements for Medicaid and SNAP recipients, potentially affecting millions of Americans' access to healthcare and food assistance. Projected economic impact proponents argue that the bill will spur economic growth by reducing taxes and increasing investment in defense and infrastructure. The White House projects a 5.2% increase in GDP by 2029, attributing this growth to the legislation's provisions. However, critics caution that the bill's substantial tax cuts and increased spending could exacerbate the national deficit, with the Congressional Budget Office estimating an addition of $3.3 trillion to the national debt over the next decade. Strategic objectives. Economic growth. By making tax cuts permanent and incentivizing investment, the bill aims to stimulate economic expansion and job creation. Fiscal responsibility. The spending cuts are intended to offset the revenue loss from tax reductions, though the effectiveness of this balance remains a point of contention. National security. Increased funding for defense and border security is designed to strengthen the country's security infrastructure. Healthcare reform. The bill seeks to reduce federal spending on healthcare programs through policy changes, though this may lead to reduced access for some populations. Pros of the Big Beautiful Bill. 1. Economic growth stimulus. Tax cuts. The bill extends the 2017 tax cuts, which are seen as a major incentive for businesses to invest in the U.S. economy, potentially increasing job creation and productivity. Job creation. Proponents believe the bill will generate more jobs, particularly in sectors like defense, manufacturing, and infrastructure, due to increased government spending. Permanent tax relief. The permanent extension of tax cuts provides long-term financial relief for both individuals and businesses, boosting consumer spending and business expansion. Defense and infrastructure boost. Increased spending on defense and infrastructure, including border security and missile defense systems, can be seen as a way to improve national security and modernize public services. 2. Fiscal responsibility, potential. Spending cuts in social programs. There are proposed cuts to Medicaid and food assistance programs, which, while controversial, may reduce government spending over time. Supporters argue this is necessary for long-term fiscal sustainability. Increased revenue from corporate taxes. The tax cuts are expected to stimulate enough business activity that it offsets some of the immediate revenue loss. 3. National security and border control increased defense spending. The bill allocates $150 billion more to defense, which is seen as essential in maintaining U.S. military dominance and countering external threats. Border wall funding. Additional funding for the border wall is seen by supporters as a vital measure to curb illegal immigration and improve national security. Cons of the Big Beautiful Bill. 1. Increase in national debt. Massive debt addition. The bill's increased spending, particularly on defense and social programs, could exacerbate the national debt. Critics warn that raising the debt ceiling by $5 trillion could undermine long-term fiscal stability. Tax cuts for the wealthy. Critics argue that the bill disproportionately benefits the wealthy and large corporations, contributing to income inequality, and not necessarily benefiting average American workers. 2. Impact on social safety nets, cuts to Medicaid and food assistance. The proposed cuts to Medicaid and food assistance, SNAP, could leave millions of vulnerable Americans without necessary health care or food security. This has drawn significant opposition from those who view it as a dismantling of vital social safety nets. Stricter work requirements. The bill's tougher eligibility criteria for social programs, including stricter work mandates for Medicaid and SNAP recipients, may hurt low-income families, disproportionately impacting minorities and vulnerable populations. 3. Potential negative effects on middle-class families. Increased taxes for the middle class. While the bill provides tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy, many middle-class families may not see the same level of benefit, especially if cuts to social programs result in reduced services. Rising healthcare costs. With Medicaid cuts, many lower-income Americans may lose healthcare coverage, forcing them to rely on private insurers with high premiums. Republican perspective. Support. Economic growth. Republicans largely support the bill's tax cuts, arguing they will stimulate economic growth, create jobs, and make the U.S. more competitive globally. Lower taxes on corporations and businesses are expected to lead to increased investment in the economy, fostering job creation. Fiscal responsibility. Republicans emphasize the bill's spending cuts, particularly targeting entitlement programs, which they view as necessary for reducing government waste and ensuring future fiscal responsibility. They argue that reducing government spending is crucial to preventing the U.S. from becoming too dependent on debt. National security. The increase in defense spending and border security is seen as a top priority for national security, which aligns with conservative goals of strengthening U.S. military and securing the southern border. Democratic perspective. Opposition. Wealth inequality. Democrats have strongly criticized the bill for benefiting the wealthy and large corporations, arguing that it will exacerbate income inequality and not provide enough benefit to working-class Americans. They believe that tax cuts for corporations and the rich will not trickle down to ordinary citizens. Cuts to social programs. The cuts to Medicaid and food assistance are a major point of contention. Democrats argue that these cuts will hurt vulnerable communities, particularly low-income families, the elderly, and people with disabilities. Debt concerns. Democrats are concerned that the bill's massive increase in the national debt, by an estimated $3.3 trillion over the next decade, will harm future generations by burdening them with debt while providing no long-term solutions to income inequality or healthcare access. Independent and third-party critique. Short-term gains versus long-term instability. Independent analysts have expressed concerns that while the bill may provide short-term boosts to the economy, it could lead to long-term instability, especially due to rising deficits and cuts to essential services. They argue that sustainable economic growth should be built on both fiscal responsibility and support for all social classes, rather than only benefiting large corporations and the wealthy. Conclusion. The Big Beautiful Bill has significant pros in terms of economic stimulation, tax cuts, and defense spending, which align with conservative and business interests. However, it also comes with major cons that could impact national debt, social safety nets, and middle-class Americans. The bipartisan debate is stark, with Republicans praising the economic and security measures, while Democrats focus on the negative impact on the vulnerable population and increasing inequality. The success of the bill will ultimately depend on how it is implemented and whether the projected economic growth can offset the long-term financial and social costs. If you found this update valuable, do like, share, and subscribe to stay informed.